Welcome back. In the previous video, we created our frame using this code here and then using this OPP style code in here. So if I run the code here, what we have is an empty blank frame. So what we are going to achieve in this video is to add what are known as controls or widgets and then style our frame a little bit to have something like the title bar, the title on the title bar, and then some controls on the interface. So by the way, what are controls? If you access the documentation API by carrying out a simple search on Google, wx control, you will get to the documentation API page where you can see that we have numerous type of controls, which include buttons, static text, choices, combo box, text field, text controls, and things like that. So the controls or the widgets are usually improved upon as the technology improves. So if you compare the controls available in the classic version of wxPython and the Phoenix version, you will see that there are a lot of innovations and improvement. For example, like the ribbon control, it wasn't available in the classic version, but now we have it in wx Phoenix. Now let's go back to our code. So in the code here, when we run the code here, what we have is a blank frame. So first of all, let's see how we can add title to the title bar. So I'm going to add a title to the title bar. To do that is as simple as coming to the frame and then add the title just like that. So if you come to the frame object from the sample code here, you will see that the frame object accepts parameters or arguments such as frame, the parent, the ID, then the title. So as it is, the parent is set to none. Then we need to put comma, then the ID. We can set the ID to a default ID of -1. And then we can now tell the title, we can set our title to something like my first GUI app, or you can type in whatever you want to type there. Then there are other parameters we can also set for our frame, which includes position and then size and even style. So before I talk about those ones, let me save and run the code and let's see what we have. So if I run the code, you see that our title is now appearing on the title bar, my first GUI, which is the title, and that is fine. So you can maximize, the minimize are all there by default. So we are going to see how we can tamper with them later on. So now the next argument or parameter we can supply on our frame is the position. If I run the code, you see that the default position is to the top right, top left corner of the screen. If I want it to be maybe somewhere at the bottom right corner, somewhere here, when the frame starts, so I can use this argument of position to specify that. So let's try that. So it is given by POS for position is equals to, in two open and close parentheses, we will now supply the position. So let's say on the x-axis we go on 800 pixels, and then on the y-axis we go like 450 pixels. So let's see where the position is going to be on that. So as you can see, our frame is now appearing to the bottom right corner of the screen. So if you want to adjust it, you can still adjust it. So you can play around with that at your own leisure. So the next argument we are going to take a look at is the size. If I run the code, you see that our frame has the default size. How about if we want to set the size to our own taste? Of course, we can set it to our own taste depending on how we want our application window to be. So let's talk about the size here. So I'm going to set the size. You do it in opening and close parentheses. So the width is going to be 420, and then the height should be like 335. So if I run the code, we see that the width and height has been reduced. So that is how to set the size of your frame. So the next argument on the list there is style. So this style, the style of the frame as it is the default style, and the style is the one controlling the title bar, which includes the minimize and the maximize and then the closer buttons. So if you want to temper with the size, with the settings, you can achieve that using the style argument. And under the style argument, you can, for example, disable maximize or disable minimize, or even disable the close button, or you can even disable the entire bar using the style argument. So if you did not specify the style as we have done in this code, the style is set to the default style. So here, if I want to change the style to maybe contain just the title bar without maximize, I'm going to disable maximize in this case. So I can do that just by specifying the style. Then style, I will call the wx caption in capital letter, wx caption. So if I run it the way it is now, what we have is just the blank title bar without the buttons. So if I wish to enable some of the buttons, I will now separate the style with a vertical bar. So the next style I'm going to add is the close button and then the minimize button without the maximize button. So it's going to be wx dot close underscore box, close box, all in capital. Then separate it by the vertical bar. Then I will now call wx dot minimize underscore box. So if I now run the code, you can now see that we have our title bar, but the maximize is disabled. Even if I right click, I cannot maximize the frame, but I can minimize it, but the maximize is disabled. So if I want to add it back, I will need to add the maximize style just by calling the wx dot maximize style. So leaving out this box will actually launch the frame in a maximize mode. So also here, if you leave out this box for this minimize, it will launch the frame in a minimized mode. So I don't think we need any of this style for now. So we can remove them and then leave our frame the way it is by default using the default style. So the next thing we are going to take a look at is adding the controls, that is the widget, or what a layman will call the element on our frame. So before we add anything to our frame, just like the way we have here, before you add these controls or elements to the frame, you need to add in something we call a panel, which is a layer that will cover this gray area. So the advantages of having the panel there is, one, to enable the tab button on your keyboard, the tab traverse, to work properly, so that you can tab traverse from one widget or control to another. Then another advantage is for you to be able to change the background color of your frame or your window. As it is now, it will be difficult or impossible for you to change this gray color of your frame. So, but if you add the panel first before you add your widget or your controls on the panel, to go a long way. But before then, I would like to mention that There are basically two layout management approaches when laying out widgets or controls on the panel on your frame. The first is the manual method. The manual method uses coordinate positioning approach, where you use a coordinate of x axis and then the y axis to position your widget on the frame. But that method has a great disadvantage, which we are going to see very soon. Then an improvement on that is using the box sizer layout method. So using the box sizers layout management approach is the best approach so far, using wxPython GUI library. So now let's add our panel to our frame. So I'm going to call it maybe something like background, and then I'm going to set it to the wx panel. P is in capital letter. So the panel will have a frame, we have a parent of the, we have the frame as its parent. So the frame object is going to serve as the parent to the panel. So let's see if I run the code. If you observe carefully, you see that the grid area is now looking like a whitish in color because we have laid our panel on it. To be really sure that we have our panel covering our frame, let's set the background color for the panel and see what we are going to have. So if you call the background object and then set background color, make sure the color and the panel, and make sure the set is a capital, background, the first letter is in capital, and then color, the first letter C is also in capital. So you call the set background color method on the background object, which is the panel covering our frame. So we'll set the color to, let's say something like red, and then run the code and let's see what we have. So as you can see, the background is changed to red. So this is a very good confirmation that our panel is actually covering our frame. So now that we have the panel set, now it is time for us to lay our controls or widgets on the panel of our frame. So here I'm going to use the coordinate positioning method, that is the coordinate. So here I'm going to start by using the manual coordinate positioning method of layout management in wxPython. If you can remember, I mentioned that we have primarily two layer management approaches in wxPython. That is the manual coordinate positioning or the absolute coordinate positioning or the sizer layout management approach. So here let's start with the manual coordinate positioning. So on our frame, I'm going to add in some controls just to demonstrate advantage or disadvantage of the manual coordinate position. So I'm going to add up some couple of controls. I have already done my trial and error coordinate positioning, and I have determined the coordinates of some of the controls I'm going to place. So first of all, I'm going to add a text control, that's a text box to cover somewhere here, then followed by two buttons to the right. Then at the bottom, I'm going to use another text control with multiple lines at the bottom of the frame. So don't forget that the default size of our frame is actually set to 420 pixels width and 335 pixels height. If you want to get more methods for the panel, as I've done using the set background color here, you can easily check the documentation API by carrying out a Google search on wx panel, and then if you get to the panel documentation API, you get to see more methods that the panel supports. So going back to the code, in order to add a control, you need to call the controls method, and different controls have different methods, which usually begin with wx dot the name of that control. So since we want to add a text area or a text field, the command or the syntax is given by this. If you access the documentation API, you see that the syntax is given by text control, just like the abbreviation of control, CTRL. And then these are numbers of methods that it supports, just like in any other control offered by wx. So now let's add our text control and then supply some of these arguments to it. So first of all, call wx dot text in capital letter, then C in capital letter, TRL for control, open and close parentheses. Then the first argument is usually the parent, and the parent in this case is our background. That is where the text control or the text box is going to be placed. So you call the background object, which is the parent. Then the next argument is the ID. If you check the documentation, the ID, then the value, then position, and so on. So the reason why we are not using self here is because we are not using the object-oriented style for creating the frame. So later on, I want to talk about using the object-oriented style to create or to add some of these controls. And here we are going to use this self argument. So for now, you don't need it since the code is not based on OOP style. So the next argument is the ID, which we usually set to -1, which is a kind of default any IP, any ID. So the next argument we can supply to our text control is the value. So you can actually leave the value to none, to empty. Set the value on empty if you don't want to have value on your text box. But here, let me just type in something for the value. I can easily type empty string if I wish it to leave, if I wish it to be empty. But here, let me type in something so that it will make more sense. Type in something like enter name. Then the next argument you can supply for the text box is the position, then followed by the size, style, validator, and the name. So, but we are not going to do everything here. We are going to focus just on maybe the first 5 or 4 arguments. So here I'm going to add position and then the size. So the position of my text field is going to be POS for position, then in parentheses 5 pixels to the left and then 5 pixels from the top. That's X along the X and Y axis respectively. Then comma, then the last but not the least argument is the size. So the size of our text field in this case, I'm going to set it to 20 pixels length and then 25 pixels height. So let's run the code and see what we have. So this is exactly what we have. It is 5 pixels to the left and then 5 pixels from the top. That is the position, and that is the manual positioning, coordinate positioning approach of layout management. So you can assign the whole of this control to a variable to create an object on that variable, so that later on you can use the object to carry out other settings or styling on the object. Later on, we're going to see the advantage of assigning your text control to an object. So here I'm going to call my text field object as text field. So that later on, if I need to add or style the object, all I need to do is to call this, and then it will apply the styling to my text field. So now that we have added the text field, if you run the code still remains the same. So now let's add two buttons here, and we are going to call the buttons button 1 and button 2 respectively. To add a button, all you need to do is to call the button method. So wx.buttons, and then open and close parentheses. So if you look up the API for button, you will see that it also has a number of arguments that can be taken, just like the text control above. The only difference here is that instead of having value for the text control, here we have label. That is just the difference, but everything still remains the same. So we are going to use some of these arguments to style our button. So let's go back to the code. So the first argument is usually the parent. If had it been we are using the OPP style, the first argument would have been self. But since we are not using the OPP style, object-oriented programming style, the first argument will just be the parent, and the parent is the background, just as we have here, which is where the button control is going to be placed. Then the next argument is the ID. So here we set it to default any ID -1. Then the next, for a button, instead of having the value, is going to be label. So label is going to be, let me call it button 1 in this case. You can put any name you want for the label, but let me just call it button 1 for simplicity. So the next argument is going to be the position, POS for position, and then open and close parentheses. So in the parentheses, so the position I'm going to set is going to be right after the text field, which is, remember that the length of the text field is 210. So the position will probably start from 225 from the left, and then 5 from the top, then comma. Then the size, I'm going to give it a size of 80 by 25. So 80 width and then 25 height. If I run the code, you will see that we have our button label as button 1. So you can use whatever label you wish here, just by changing the label name here. So now let me assign the control to a variable called button 1, so that we can later on apply or use the object in our code. Then I'm going to create another button, which is the second button. I'll just duplicate the code above for button 2. The label, I'm going to change it to button 2. Then for the position, it's going to be a little bit further than the button 1. So the position will be 315 by 5. Then the size will remain the same. So if I click on run, you see that our button 2 button is appearing just after the button 1. So below this, in this open space here, I'm going to put another text field. But this time around, the text field is going to have multiple lines and some other couple of styling to it. So what I will do, I will just duplicate the text field above. Well, let me change the name to avoid conflict with the text field above. I'm changing the name to text area. Every other property remains the same, except for the value. I'm going to ignore the value in this case, so I will remove the value argument. Then the positioning, I'm going to set the position to 5 by 35. Then the size will also change. The size will be 390 by 260. So let me run the code and see what I have. So this is our new text field. You can type in whatever you want to type, but note that I cannot, even though I'm pressing enter on my keyboard, I cannot go to the second line. So I will need this text area to support multiple lines. So I'm going to add another styling to it so that it will support multiple lines. So that is the essence of the argument style. So style is equals to, there are a number of styles you can apply to your text box. If you check up the documentation API, you'll see so many of them. So the one we're interested here is the one that will give us multiple line. So wxTE underscore multi-line will give us a multiple line style to our text box. So if I run, I can now type on multiple lines. So another style I would like to add to the code is, as you can see, if you notice carefully, on the right hand side we have a vertical scroll. If I type in multiple lines, you'll notice that we have vertical scroll, just like that. So I would like to add another vertical or a horizontal scroll, just like the vertical scroll. So to do that, you separate your styles with a vertical bar, and then you type in the syntax for the horizontal scroll, which is given by wxH for horizontal. Then you type in the scroll to have the vertical scroll on your text box. So here we have the vertical scroll, just like that. So this is how to apply some of this styling. So you can check out the documentation API for more styling you can apply. So now that we have our frame filled up with a couple of controls using the manual coordinate positioning layout management method. So as I've mentioned earlier, one of the disadvantages of using the manual coordinate positioning method is that when you expand the frame, the controls or the widgets don't expand together with the frame, which is not proper. So we would like our frame to expand and then the controls to also expand together with the frame. So this blank space doesn't make any sense when we expand our frame. So in order to overcome this disadvantage, there are a couple of ways. You can either disable this maximize box here so that the frame will not be resizable. But the best approach to overcome this limitation is to use sizer layout management approach. Let me show you how to disable this as we have done earlier, and then later on we are going to talk about how to use the sizer layout management approach to solve the same issue. So if you have not forgotten, on the frame object earlier on we set the style to disable the maximize box. So here I'm going to repeat the same style. First of all, call wx caption. So caption is capital letter, just the way we have it earlier. Then we separate the other styling with a vertical bar. Wx dot close box, close underscore box. Then wx minimize box, minimize underscore box. So here we have our maximize box disabled. So we can no longer resize the frame, and this is a temporary solution to the issue of the layout management issue of expanding the frame and then the controls remaining in an absolute position where they are. So however, a lasting solution to this would be to use the layout management approach. So here I have a code in my code snippet file which uses the layout management approach. So if I copy this and then take it into my file, if I run the code, you'll see that we have the same frame as the previous one with the same issue. When we expand the frame, our widgets or controls don't expand together with the frame. So a lasting solution for this is to apply the sizer layout management approach. So here I've added the sizer and then I've enabled it. So now if I run the code, you'll see that we have the same frame with the same widgets on it. So if I expand the frame, the controls or the widgets expand together with the frame, which is beautiful. And that is the best approach in layout management. So there are so many sizers. However, in this code we use just two of them, just one, sorry, but with the different variation. So we use the box sizer with its horizontal property and then the vertical property. So we created an object for the box sizer, and then we added the text fields and then the button 1 and button 2 to the box sizer, which is by default set to horizontal positioning. And then we have some arguments, the position, the flag being set accordingly. So this video is lengthy and it's getting out of time. I may not be able to explain the concept of these styles or this argument in detail. But later on, we are going to talk more about the sizer method of layout management in wxPython in this video series. So if you don't understand what is going on here, don't worry, you can follow along the video series. So then we also add another vertical sizer, the same box sizer but using the vertical property, and then we added the horizontal sizer, box sizer we created above, and then we added the text area we created above to it, and then we set the flags and the border property to 5 pixels. Then at the end, we added the set sizer to the background, which is the panel that was created above. So this is the code that creates the box sizer. So if you check up the sizer API documentation, you will see that there are a couple of sizers that could be used. Here we use the box sizer, but apart from the box sizer, we also have some other sizers, which include the statics box sizer, the grid sizer, the flex grid sizer, and then the grid back sizer. So we're going to take a look at all of this in more details in the subsequent video. Now that we have seen how to use the sizer and then how to use the manual coordinate positioning to create our layout on our frame panel, let's quickly demonstrate how to add events to some of these controls. So binding event is actually one of the common properties of most of the widgets or controls. So let's see how we can add an event to the button. Let's say, for example, we want this button to have an event that when we click on it, something will happen. We can decide to say, okay, when we click on this button 1, we want it to grab whatever text is here and then print it here. So this is a simple task, but you need to know the event method to apply to this, and then the property that you can use to grab whatever is here, and then the property that you can use to print whatever is here. So this is quite complex, but it is simple if you understand the concept. So but in this case, I'm not going to carry out such a complex task. I will simplify the task just by adding an event that when I click on this button, it should maybe print a text on the console. So let's do that. So that concept is called event handling. So you can check out the documentation API for more details on event handling. So let's do that on the button 1. So the event binding is given by the method called bind. It's given by this method called bind. So and we need to call it on this object, that is button 1, which is the object we want to apply the bind on. So you call button 1 dot bind, then in parentheses you provide the type of event you want to apply to the object, then comma the name of the method or the name of the function that will execute the event. So here the name of the function is called write. So we have not created the function yet, so but I will soon create it immediately. So I'll go back to the top here just before I create the app, and then I'll create a function. The function name will be called write, since that is the name I provided here. So write. So and it's going to be a simple function just to print out the statement. So the statement I'm going to print out is going to be something like maybe button 1 pressed. So when I click on this button 1, this event will run, and the event that will run is saved in this function, and the function is just a simple function to print out the statement button 1 is pressed. So let me save and then run the code. If I click on button 1, it should write the statement here, but here I'm getting an error that write takes no argument 1 given. So if I go back to the code, I need to supply a parameter here called event. So if I now rerun the code and then I click on button 1, you should print out this statement here. So button 1 is pressed. So note that you need to supply this parameter called event. And remember that if you are using the OOP style, you need to supply self as the first parameter. So any of the objects here you want to apply, you want to bind an event to, that is how to go about it. So let's say, for example, we want to add another event to the second button. I can just duplicate this code, and then instead of button 1 here, it will be button 2. Then bind ws event button. Then the name of the method to be maybe like add. So the name of the method I'm going to create for that is called add. So I will define a function called add. Then I'll pass in the parameter of event. Then the function will execute, let's say maybe 2 plus 4, which will give us 6. So print 2 plus 4. That is what is going to happen after the button 2 is clicked. So if I run the code, if I click on button 2, it should print 6. If I click on button 1, it should print that statement. So there are also a couple of other controls. These are not the only controls we can add to our frame. So here I'm going to comment out the text area here, and then add in some other couple of controls. So the first control I'm going to add is something like, maybe let's add the static text. So if you look up the documentation, API for static text, you see that static text is provided by this syntax, and it also accepts a couple of arguments, which include the parent, ID, label, position, and so on, just like any other control. So let's add a static text. So here I'm going to call it static text 1, and then it's going to be equals to wx static text, and then the first argument is going to be the background, which is the parent. Then ID is the default, any ID -1. Then the label, if you check the documentation API, the next argument is the label. That is the text that will appear for the static text. So let me call the text as, maybe I'm going to use my name, Umar Yusuf. Don't forget to include it in quotes, either single or double quote. Then the next is going to be the position, position. Then in parentheses, I'm going to specify the position. So let me use the position of the text area I disabled above. So 5 by 35. Let me run it first and see what I have. So as you can see, this is the text. So I can change the font style, the color, the whatever of the text. So in order to set some of this property, all I need to do is to call this object, the text object, and then apply the settings on it. So let's see how to set maybe the font size. So in order to set the font size, you need to call the object and then set the font, and then the font method accepts wxFont, which is also another method that accepts the following argument. So the argument has been defined below in this commented line, and the explanation is as follows. The first argument is the size. So the size is set to 13. If I run the code now, you see that the size of the font has been increased. So if I increase it to say something like 20, if I run the code, you see that the size of the font will have increased to 20. So then the next argument is the font family. So it is set to 71. The font family varies from 72 to 76. So presently we are using the default, the 71 font family. If you look up the documentation, you will see more details about this font family. So 71, let me change it to maybe 75 and see the kind of font family it has. So this is probably Korea text font family, which is giving the ID of 75. So then the next argument here is the style. So the style could either be 90, 93, and 94. So here we are using 90. If I change it to 94 and then run the code, see that the font style would have changed a little bit. So that is that. Then the last but not the least is the weight, which is 91 in this case. So if I set it to 92 and then run the code, you will see that our font width has increased. So that is how to manipulate the text property, some of the property of the text. So after creating the text, then you call the set font method on this wxFont method, and then you provide the following argument, which I explained in the commented line below. The first is the size, font family, style, and then the weight. You can check up the documentation API for more details. Then another control or widget I'm going to demonstrate here is the choice box or combo box. So we have, if you check up the documentation API for the text, for the choice box, see that it is given by this command, and it also accepts parameters just like any other control, which include the parent, ID, position, default, choice, list, and so on. So the choice is almost the same thing as combo box, but the only difference is that combo box allows you to edit, while the choice box doesn't allow you to edit the content. So let me demonstrate the two of them. So first of all, we have the choice, and later on we're going to demonstrate the combo box. So combo box, then this is for the choice. So in order to create the choice object, let me call it ch for short. Then you call the wx dot choice in capital letter, then open and close parentheses. Then within the parentheses, you can now supply your arguments. So first, the first argument is going to be the parent, which is the background. Then the next is going to be the ID, which is -1 in this case, the default any ID. So if you check the documentation for choice, then you can now have the position, the size, then the choice list. So this is actually one of the special arguments, choice list. And remember that it is called choices in this case. So let's go back to the code and continue. So after the ID, we are going to have the position. Then after the position, we can have the size. But the position, I think I'm going to make this 25 by 45 so that it will come down a little bit. It will be on a different coordinate position from the static text above it. So then the next parameter we're going to have is choices in plural and small letter. So this is going to be a list. Let's say some continents in the world. So here we have the lists containing Africa, America, Asia, and Europe. So let me run the code and see what we have. Okay, as you can see, it is like hidden under static text above. So instead of 45 here, let's make it 95 and then run the code again. So here we have our choice control. So the choice control has been created. So if you wish, you can set any of these options as your default choice. You can check the documentation API to do that. So that is how to create the choice list. Then the next is the combo box. The combo box is basically the same thing as the choice control, but the only difference is that it gives you the ability to edit the content. So the combo box is created using this syntax, wx.combobox. If you check the documentation API, you see that the parameters is basically the same thing as that of the choice control. So I can simply copy the content of the choice control and paste right there. So I pasted the content of the choice above. Then I'm going to make a little modification to the positioning. So for the top axis, let me set it to 135, and then every other thing still remain the same. So let me run the code. And then as you can see, the top is a choice control, then the bottom is a combo box. So combo box allows you to edit the content, while a choice box doesn't allow you to edit the content. That is just the basic difference between the two. So here you can type in your own customizer, your own custom content, while here you cannot type the custom content. So there are a bunch of other controls you can add according to the nature of the application you are developing. So here I've shown you how to add more controls using the manual coordinate positioning layout management approach. So you can also do the whole of this using the OPP style of code. So if you remember in the previous video, we did this using the OPP style, where we have our class created, and then we have the init of the class defined, and then we inherited the init of the frame class, just like that. So here when we run the code, you see that we have the blank frame, just like in the previous file. So if you wish to further enhance the frame to have title and some bunch of other controls, all you need to do is to further define the parameters as follow. So for the init method, we have the following parameters: parent and ID. Then here the parent is set to none, and then the ID is the traditional default any ID -1. Then you can have the title. The title can be set to maybe my first GUI application. Then you can also set the size if you want to control the size, and then the position of the frame. Then here the frame should be set to none, the parent should be set to none, and then the ID -1 as well. So if you run it, you now have a better enhanced frame. So you can also set the style and some other properties, just the way we did it using the other coding style. The major difference between the other method of creating frame and this object-oriented way of creating our frame is the introduction of this word self, which refers to the instance of the class of the frame. So here, if you want to add buttons, or let's start with the panel first. If you want to add the panel the way we added it here, so you need to add in self. So you can easily copy this code and then apply it here. Make sure that it is within the method definition of the init. So you need to add the self parameter instead of assigning the parent of the panel to be frame the way we did it in the previous code. Here it will be set to self. So and if you run the code, everything still remains the same. So the same thing too if you want to add other text elements. For example, like the text, like the button. Let me copy button 1. If I want to add it here, if I paste the code, all I need to do is to call the instance of the class first and then set it to the button method. So if I run the code, I should have my button, just like that. So the approach is the same thing. The only caution you need to take is the instance of the class we are using, which is usually called or referred to by this self argument. So I would like to stop at this point, and in the subsequent video we're going to talk more about OOP style of creating the frame, where we're going to use a tool called the wxFormBuilder to generate most of these complex codes within few minutes. I hope you enjoy watching this. Thank you.